All right, we're going to be looking at day 2 of circles here, and we're going to look at circumference. And circumference is the perimeter of a circle. Circles are round and they're fancy, so their perimeter gets a fancy name too. So some vocabulary that you're going to hear used when we're doing this is pi. And I know, I'm sure you've heard about pi. You may have even eaten pie on Pi Day. But pi is this ratio that compares the circumference to the diameter. So if I take the circumference of my circle, which is its perimeter, and I divide it by its diameter, remember diameter is the distance all the way across and through the middle, I will get approximately 3.14, or more exactly 22 divided by 7 is what it will reduce down to, or what an equivalent fraction is for it. And this was discovered a long time ago in ancient Rome, and that is where this comes from, and they kept trying to go back and trying to get it out further and further and more exact. In terms of pi, to leave pi in your final answer like you would a variable, so sometimes it'll say leave it in terms of pi. So instead of substituting in the 3.14 for the pi symbol and then multiplying that and getting a number that's approximately 3 times bigger than that, I can just leave it as 8 pi. So as I was saying there, the other option is to substitute 3.14 in, or 22/7 if it asked you for it in fraction form. You know 8 times 3 is going to make that about 3 times larger. And if I want to do exact, I would get that this is 25.12. So 8 pi and 25.12, those are equivalent to each other. So this would be more of an exact answer. And this would be the answer with pi. So if it says in terms of pi, then that's what it wants you to do. It just says stop here, don't do that final step. So when I'm finding circumference, there's 2 different things I can do. I can either do the circumference equals pi times the diameter, because remember we said circumference divided by diameter equals pi. Well, we know when we solve equations that if we're dividing by something, we can undo that by multiplying both sides. Well, when I do that, it'll cancel it over here, and I will get c equals pi times diameter, which is where we get our equation from. Now, diameter of a circle, remember, is all the way across the circle and through the center. And half of that, so halfway across, so from the center to the outside, is called the radius. So if instead of using diameter, if I take diameter out, I can put in 2 times the radius. So I also like to write this as 2r to remind myself, instead of splitting out the 2 and the r, to remind myself that 2 times the radius is the diameter. That is the same thing. And then multiplying times pi. So basically I can switch out this one for this one, because 2 times the radius would be 2 times half a way across the circle, which would be the whole way across, which is the diameter. So when we find the circumference of a circle with a radius of 4, using 3.14 for pi. So since I have the radius, I'm going to use that equation right there, that formula. So c, the circumference, equals 2 times the radius times pi. So they want me to find the circumference. They've told me that the radius is 4. And then they told me instead of pi, they want me to use 3.14. So the first step is going to be c equals 8 times 3.14. And when I do that last one, I'm going to find my circumference is equal to 25.12 units. And they didn't tell me inches or whatever, but it's just units, not units squared, because units, it is a perimeter, it's just a distance. This next one here, it says a measuring wheel rolls along a field. That actually looks more like a unicycle, doesn't it? But we've used those in class. We've used those wheels to measure. And it says that our measuring wheel has a length of, it wants to know how long the tire track is. So it wants to know the circumference. It wants to know the distance around. If it tells me that it's a 20-inch wheel. So if it's a 20-inch wheel, that means it goes all the way across. So we're talking diameter. So we want circumference equals pi times diameter. Well, my diameter just told me is 20, and it told me to use 3.14 for pi. So 3.14 times 20. So I'm going to get a circumference of 62.8, and since it told me inches, I can put my label in. So the circumference of that wheel is 62.8 inches. Next one says, what is the circumference of a circle with a diameter of 21? And this time, instead of 3.14, it's going to have us use the fraction 22/7. So my circumference equals pi times the diameter. So my circumference is going to be 22/7 times 21. You're like, Mrs. Williams, why are you floating that 21 up there in the air? Well, that's because I know I can make any whole number into a fraction by putting a 1 underneath it, and I need to make it a fraction because I'm multiplying it times another fraction. So I notice here that I can reduce before I multiply. 7 divided by 7 is 1, and 21 divided by 7 is 3, which makes my multiplication problem much smaller. 22 times 3 is a lot smaller than 22 times 21. So 22 times 3 is going to give me 66. 1 times 1 is going to give me 1. So the circumference of my circle is 66, and since it told me centimeters, I can say that that is centimeters. My next problem says find the diameter of this coin to the right. Use 3.14 for pi. So now I'm trying to find the diameter, and I know the circumference. It's telling me the circumference. So circumference is still pi times diameter. Only when I go to plug my numbers in this time, I'm going to be putting my numbers in a different place. Since this is my circumference, I'm going to plug it in, and I'm switching colors here. So since I'm looking for the diameter and I know the circumference, I'm going to do this in orange. So my circumference is 69.90. So I've plugged in for my C. And then I've got 3.14 for my pi, and I don't know my diameter. So 3.14 times something got me to that answer. So I need to undo that multiplication. So I'm going to divide by 3.14, and I need to make sure that I do that on both sides. 3.14 divided by 3.14 gives me 1D. We just don't typically put that 1 in there. We know that that 1 is there. We just don't typically write it. And when I divide 69.9 by 3.14, I get this horribly long decimal. And it didn't tell me what to round to, but I'm going to go ahead and round it to the tenths place. Actually, I'm going to round to the hundredths place, I'm sorry, because we went out to the hundredths place here. So you would get 22.26, and I can give it a label because it was telling me it was in millimeters. So 22.26 millimeters must be the diameter of the coin. That means from here all the way across and through that middle point is 22.26 millimeters. Down here, we're going to connect lines to the measurements on the right that represent a circle width. So if I have a circumference of 3 times pi meters, when I look at this, if it's just the 3, that means that my radius, my diameter must have been 3, because circumference equals diameter times pi, so that 3 took the place of that, so I have diameter of 3. This next one says circumference of 4 pi. Well, circumference equals diameter times pi. So on this one, my diameter must have been 4. Well, now, since my diameter is 4, half of my diameter would be my radius, so my radius must have been 2 for this one. And if my diameter here is 3, my radius is half of that, so my radius here must have been 1.5. So that is everything about circumference of a circle. If you have any questions, there's a partner practice on the back, and you can check it out there and see if you can figure out how to do those.